I'm Zoe Hart, and this is my story, told the way I lived it, plain as the paint on my porch. I grew up in a small blue house on Maple Street in Cleveland, America. The porch leans a little to the left, like it's tired after a long shift, but it holds. The front steps remember every shoe and every storm. In the kitchen, the window over the sink looks out at a maple tree that throws shade in summer and lets in a bright, honest sun in winter. I always liked that window. It made the house feel awake. It made me feel awake, too. My mom, Linda, kept a glass jar of coins by the front door. She called it just-in-case money, though we all knew it was mostly for takeout when she didn't want to cook. My dad, Mark, would empty his pockets at night and say that money is a river that never stops. He'd chuckle like he owned a boat on that river. As a kid, I believed him. Later, I learned rivers flood, and they also dry up, and you're the one who has to fix the roof and save the seeds.
That blue house taught me that.
It taught me how to patch, how to plan, and how to be steady when other people aren't. By the time I was 30, I had a life that reached beyond Maple Street, but still circled back to it. I worked hard, kept my head down, said yes when most people said no, and learned to love early mornings. Most weeks, I moved between Cleveland, Miami, and New York, signing papers, meeting partners, and making sure that every deal had a real backbone. I didn't parade my wins. I stacked them. When I came home, I dropped my bag by the door like I was still 16, sat on the porch, and let the quiet part of America sink in. The house was my proof that I was still me. The night everything shifted was cold enough to make the windows talk. I woke at 2 a.m. to the buzz of my phone hopping across the nightstand. One alert, then two, then five in a row. My stomach fell. The banking app showed transfers moving out, each one like a door left open in a storm. $75,000. $50,000. $125,000. Another $100,000. Numbers were stacked until the total hit $500,000. $500,000. I stared at the screen and forgot to breathe. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch, the way you tell yourself thunder is only noise. But the list kept growing, and the river my dad talked about was tearing through my life. I called the bank, wrapped in a blanket, standing by that kitchen window. A calm woman named Dana answered. She ran through security questions, then put me on hold, then came back with a voice that wanted to be gentle. The transfers were approved from a trusted device, she said. And from the recovery email. I asked whose device. She read it to me. My dad's phone. My mom's email. I looked at the coin jar by the door and felt something crack. Trusted, I repeated, and the word tasted wrong. Dana explained how to freeze the account and start a fraud claim. I did it all, hands shaking, hearing only the hum of my old fridge and my own breath. When the line went dead, I stood in the blue kitchen with the phone warm in my palm and the house cold around me. I wasn't crying. It was a different feeling, a kind of still anger that makes every detail sharp. The maple tree outside, the hairline split in the counter, the draft under the back door. I made coffee because I needed the sound of something simple. Then I opened my laptop and pulled every record I had, login logs, device IDs, mail headers, timestamps. I saved screenshots, exported spreadsheets, and printed statements until the printer light blinked. The stack grew high, and with it, a hard, clean plan. At dawn, my friend Sasha texted from New York. Sasha is the one who can look at a mess and find the hinge that moves the whole thing. Come down to Miami, she wrote. We'll sort it from there. Miami meant better access to partners and a straight line to the right people. It also meant sun, and right then, I wanted a sky that didn't feel like it was pressing down on me. I booked a morning flight, moved the coin jar into the safe, locked the porch door, and told myself I was still the same person who could steer through a storm. I left a note on the fridge for myself. You're in charge. Before I walked out, I took one last look at the living room. The couch had a small tear in the arm from a move years ago that never got fully fixed. I used to hate that tear. Now I loved it. It was honest. My life was split the same way, soft on one side, tough stitching on the other. I grabbed my bag and checked my account again. Frozen. Good. $500,000 gone. But the damage was held in place, like a wound tied tight until you can get help. I knew the next calls I'd make. A lawyer in Boston named Paul, who doesn't waste words. An operations lead who has never missed a deadline. Sasha, waiting with that clear voice of hers. On the ride to the airport, Cleveland slid by in gray light, and I tried to think about anything else. I failed. I kept hearing my dad's old line about the river and my mom's laugh when she'd shake that coin jar. I wondered how we had ended up here, the three of us standing on different shores. I didn't have a full answer, but I knew this. Trust isn't a word you frame and hang on a wall. It's a lock, a ledger, a set of rules you follow even when it costs you. That's not cold. That's care with a spine. And as the plane lifted, leaving the blue house behind for now, I made a quiet promise. I would set the rules, I would keep the house standing, and I would get every dollar back. Here's the part my parents never knew, the part one kept behind contracts and calm smiles. 2 years ago, I bought a cruise line, Harbor and Hearth Cruises, with partners Miguel and Grace. Captain Daniel runs the bridge. Leo manages the kitchens. I sign the checks, approve the routes, and choose the carpets guests never notice but always remember. We built our name on quiet care and clean lines, ships that feel like a trusted house more than a floating mall. I liked it that way. I could steer a company and still feel like the woman from the blue house on Maple Street. By the time my flight slid into Miami, the bank trail was a neat path on my laptop. The transfers pointed straight to a Grand Atlantic sailing, 7 nights along America's coast, a loop of cities I knew by their skyline silhouettes. The booking ID was bold on the screen, the suite category louder still. I stared at the cost, my money, my parents' idea of a good time, and breathed through the heat in my chest. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to make a point. Port Everglades was all bright sun and moving parts. Porters stacked luggage in tidy towers. A brass band near the terminal worked through a slow version of America the Beautiful, and a little boy waved a paper flag like a metronome. I walked past a banner that read Sail America, flashed my operations badge, and felt the peculiar lift I always feel when the gangway hums under my shoes. There's a sound to a ship at rest, like a sleeping animal that trusts you. As soon as I stepped aboard, crew members nodded with that small respect that says we're all on the same team. I nodded back. That's the rule on my decks. Titles are quiet, standards are loud. I headed to the bridge first. Daniel stood over a chart with his usual steady hands, gray at the temples, and posture like a mast. "Morning, Captain," I said. He glanced up, read my face in a snap, and didn't ask questions he didn't need. "Good to have you aboard, Miss Hale," he said. "Do you want the ship's status?" I shook my head. "I'm going to handle something personal. Keep us on schedule." He gave one clean nod. On my way out, I caught a whiff of cinnamon from the bakery below and pictured Leo barking at a sheet of pastries like they were recruits. Normal is a comfort when you're about to step into not normal. Guest services sat under a wall-sized map of America's coast dotted with tiny, warm lights. Ava, our manager, straightened as I approached. She's the kind of woman who can soothe a storm with her tone. "Ms. Hale," she said softly, "how can I help?" I slid the booking ID across the counter and lowered my voice. "Please confirm the guests, suite number, and charges." She typed, eyes moving fast. "Suite 901, she said. "Guests, Linda Hale and Mark Hale." My parents' names looked wrong on the glow of her screen, like graffiti on clean paint. "Thank you," I said. "No alerts to them yet. I'll knock." The hallway to deck 9 smelled faintly of fresh lemon and sea. I watched the crew do their small miracles. A scuffed corner buffed back to perfect, a stroller lifted without fuss, a nervous couple shown how to read their keycards. This is the work that keeps a ship honest. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and told myself to be the same. Polite, firm, exact. Outside Suite 901, I paused. The brass numbers gleamed. I thought of the $500,000, like a bell I could not unring, and felt my jaw set. I knocked twice. Mom opened the door in a silk robe the color of champagne. Dad stood behind her, grinning like he'd won a prize on a game show. The suite behind them was all soft light and ocean, a bowl of fruit and a chilled bottle standing by to pretend that money is joy instead of responsibility. For a beat, no one said anything. Then they did what I suppose they've always done when they don't know what else to do. They laughed. Not loud, but bright enough to sting. "Do you work as a cleaner here?" Dad said, and he actually winked, the kind of wink that had charmed waitresses and neighbors my whole life. The words cut, but they also lit a match in me I'd been saving for the right moment. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at the robe or the fruit or the ocean, trying to flatter them into a better version of themselves. I looked only at their faces. "No," I said, keeping my voice even, careful mine. "I'm the owner." They didn't blink, so I added the simplest truth I had. "And you haven't paid your bills." I let the sentence land and said nothing else, because silence can be a ledger when you use it right. Behind me, the ship gave a small, contented hum, as if the hull itself had taken my side. Mom's mouth lifted and fell, like a handle on a stuck door. Dad's grin slackened, then tried to rebuild itself and failed. I watched the realization crawl across their features, each step slower than the last. You can see people fitting new facts into old stories. It looks like someone trying to button the wrong coat. I didn't gloat. I didn't fill the space with an easy laugh or a softer line. I'm not in the business of easing lessons that need to be held. I stood square and breathed in the lemon-clean air of my hallway and let the truth finish its work. Their eyes widened and turned red. I led my parents to the Aurora Lounge, a calm room with pale wood, high ceilings, and windows that made the ocean look close enough to touch. The ship pulled away from Miami while a trio played slow guitar by the bar. A brochure on the table promised service as grand as Europe, but all I needed was the plain truth of America rolling by in blue water and white wake. I took a breath, opened my laptop, and let the numbers fill the screen. The sea spoke in a steady hum. I matched it with a steady voice. "Here's the amount," I said, tapping the ledger. $500,000 in transfers from my account. Plus charges you approved, suite extras, private tours, premium wine flights. I slid a printed invoice across the table, black letters clear against white paper. Owner, Zoe Hale. Their names were below, Linda Hale, Mark Hale. The total sat at the bottom like a stone, $500,000, with a note about service fees that made the stone heavier. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lower it either. This was not a fight. This was a bill. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. Dad rubbed his forehead, as if the numbers might smear if he pressed hard enough. He tried a laugh that didn't arrive. "You can't be the owner," he said, half to me, half to the window. I sent a quick text. In a minute, Grace stepped in, crisp and kind, with Leo just behind her, sleeves rolled from the heat of the kitchens. Captain Daniel followed and rested by the door, hands folded, eyes level. No drama, just a fact. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Hale," Grace said. Miss Hale asked me to be present. Their faces shifted. You could watch the old story crack. "I didn't need your approval to become more than the kid in the blue house on Maple Street," I said. "But I did need you not to hack your daughter." Saying the word hack felt strange in my mouth, like the wrong key in a lock. I thought of the house in Cleveland, the porch that leans, the coin jar by the door. I thought of my dad's line about money being a river and how he always grinned when he said it. I kept my eyes on the ledger. Trust is not a river. Trust is a gate, and today I was the one with the keys. I laid out the terms the way I lay out a route plan. Simple, exact, and written down. "Either you wire the full amount back by the next port," I said, "or accounting will cancel this booking, add fees, and turn the file over to our lawyer, Paul Whitman in Boston. If that happens, there will be more costs. A lot more." I pushed a second page toward them. Options, deadlines, routing details. "You are guests on this ship," I added. "I will treat you like any other guests, fairly, with clear rules." It hurt to say it like that, but hurt is not the worst thing. The worst thing is a lie that keeps going. Dad tried to turn the weight into a joke. "We were going to pay it back," he said, as if the words could count as money. Mom reached for my hand, then pulled back. "We just wanted a good week," she whispered. "We wanted to feel like people who can breathe." I heard the ache in it, and I also heard the choice in it. I kept my voice calm. "You could have asked me. You picked the lock instead." Captain Daniel shifted his stance, not a threat, a note of time. The trio in the corner moved into a softer song. The sea kept its steady beat. We talked for hours. I let them circle their reasons and their fears. I did not argue with feelings. I checked facts. I showed the device IDs that matched Dad's phone and the recovery email in Mom's name. I explained the audit trail like a map from the blue house to this white lounge. Grace took notes in clean lines. Leo brought water and, later, coffee. At one point, Dad said, "You're acting like a contract." I looked at him and said, "I sound like a woman doing her job." He blinked. That was enough. By late evening, I put the final line on the table. "Wire $200,000 now," I said. "Wire the rest by Charleston. If the funds do not arrive, we end the trip at the next port and proceed with legal action. If the funds arrive, you may remain on board, but not in the suite. A normal cabin, deck 6. No extras. No tabs." Mom stared at the water. Dad stared at the invoice. I gave them space. I looked out at America, coastline, darkened shore, and thought of the blue house, the tear in the couch arm, and all the quiet fixes that make a life strong. Near midnight, Paul called from Boston. I put him on speaker. His voice was measured, all edges and light. "This is clear," he said. "Wire the first amount tonight, and we will note good faith." Mom nodded, small and quick. Dad found his phone with a stiff hand. We waited while the first transfer moved like a slow train through a tunnel. A chime sounded. Paul confirmed, $200,000 received. Relief did not feel sweet. It felt like a door closing the way it should have closed all along. At sunrise, as the ship neared Charleston, I walked them to guest services. Ava took the new keycards from a small stack and placed them on the counter, like promises. "Deck 6, cabin 612, she said, kind as ever. "Breakfast is open until 11. No one spoke about the suite. A porter helped move their bags without a glance at the cabin downgrade. On my screen, accounting marked the credit, line by line. I sent Sasha a note. "First wire in. Security protocols updated. Thank you." She replied with a thumbs up and 3 words. "Hold your line." I watched the city come into view. Piers, cranes, a clean morning sky, and I felt the ship breathe with the tide. This wasn't a victory. It was balanced. Money is not love, and love is not a pass on the rules. Money is math, and love is a choice you make after the math is honest. I thought of Cleveland and the porch that still needs a new brace. I thought of Miami sun, New York lights ahead, and the long list of names, men and women, who keep this ship true. I thought of America, large and ordinary, where a woman can own a line of ships and still miss her small blue house. Then I closed the ledger and went back to work. We docked in New York to cheers from weekend travelers. The band on the pier lifted a bright tune that skipped across the terminal glass like a pebble across a pond. I stood by the rail and watched pallets of fruit roll up the ramp for the run back to Miami. Morning air tasted like salt and coffee. My parents walked down the gangway with small bags and a silence that felt older than all 3 of us. Mom's hand trembled on the handle. Dad kept his eyes on the boards, as if the wood might tell him what to say. I met them at the taxi lane, where porters called numbers and drivers waved with flat hands. Up close, they looked smaller, like 2 people who had worn a costume for a week and could no longer stand the weight of it. "We'll be okay," I said, and I meant it. "But there are rules now." I handed them a printed schedule for the remaining wires, with Paul's routing notes on the back. The balance was $300,000. I wrote the number in clear ink, with dates that left no room for wish or weather. Mom tucked the paper into her coat. Dad nodded, a thin, honest nod. They climbed into a yellow cab, and the door shut with a hollow thump that sounded like the end of a chapter. I watched the car turn into city traffic and vanish. There was no speech, no scene, no promise to change the world. Just a plan and a cost, like any plan that matters. I stood for a minute longer, letting the noise of New York move through me until it settled into the kind of quiet that lets a person work. Back on the ship, I went to the bridge. Captain Daniel stood with his easy stance, steady as an anchor and clean as a rule. "Departure at 1400, he said, once, like a bell. "All systems ready." I thanked him and walked the decks. Crew waved, guests laughed, and the hull hummed the way a good house hums when the heater clicks on and the windows hold. In the small conference room off the spa, I sat with Grace and Miguel. I gave them the update. First wire received, 2 more scheduled, suite charges settled, cabin reassigned. We wrote down every step and signed our names at each line. Security came next. Sasha met me with 2 coffees and a binder full of fixes. We tore out the loose idea of trusted devices and laid down new rules in plain lines. 2 checks for every recovery request, no exceptions. Alerts to 2 people when account settings change. A live human call before any transfer leaves. Hardware keys for critical access. And a pause switch that any manager can hit if something feels wrong. We trained Ava's team to ask 3 simple questions before they honored any guest request that involved money. The steps fit on a card that a person could keep in a pocket, which is where rules belong. In Miami, I sat with accounting and reopened every ledger. We built a clean lane for refunds and clawbacks and tagged every large outflow with a written reason in plain words, not codes. I wired the first recovered $200,000 back into the operating account and sent Paul a short note. Received and recorded. "Thank you." He replied with a line that made me smile. "Boundaries are cheaper than repairs." By Charleston, the second wire hit. Another $150,000 arrived in Boston. The last transfer cleared as we turned south again, and I wrote, "Paid in full," on the folder in a steady hand. After the money settled, the hard part began. It is easy to file and sign. It is hard to repair trust without lying to yourself. I flew home to Cleveland and sat on the porch of the Blue House. The porch still leaned a little left, loyal in its tilt. The maple still lay patterned shade across the steps like a quilt. I carried the coin jar to the safe and tucked it behind the documents that hold the map of my life. I changed the locks, added better lights, and stuck a small note inside the front door. "You can be kind and still say no." That evening, Mom called. Her voice was small and clear.
"We paid," she said.
"I know," I said. "Thank you." There was a quiet stretch where both of us could hear the same fork in the road. "Can we come by?" she asked. I wanted to say yes. I said, "Not yet."
"Soon.
"We'll meet in a cafe downtown first." She agreed. Later, Dad texted a photo of their checkbook with the words, "We're learning the rules." I looked at that for a long minute, then wrote back, "So am I." Learning is not shameful. It is the weight you decide to carry the right way. Back on the ship, life was not a movie, it was work. Leo rolled out a new menu for the coastal nights. Clean flavors, warm bread, soft butter that forgave every cold wind on deck. Ava trained her team on the new steps until they could explain them in their sleep. Miguel reviewed fuel costs. Daniel shifted the schedule to miss a storm near the Carolinas, and Grace ran a drill that had every deck move like a single hand. We are a line of people, not a line of headlines. People keep a ship true. At night, I walked the quiet corridors and listened for the small sounds that tell you a vessel is healthy. The even breath of the generators, the patient rush of water along the hull, the click of a latch that seats itself just right. When I finally met my parents in that cafe in Cleveland, the bell over the door rang like a clear idea. Mom wore her old wool coat. Dad looked tired and honest. I brought a small notebook and no laptop. We talked about the porch, the maple, the years when money felt like a joke, and the years when it felt like air. I did not relive the hack. I did not soften it either. "We start from here," I said. "We pay what we owe. We speak before we take. We visit when we're invited." They agreed, not with a grand vow, but with the quiet yes that work begins on. Now, when I pass a white ship with soft gold lights, I see more than paint and brass. I see a floating house where people do their jobs and look one another in the eye. Sometimes our ads claim our dining could make Europe proud. I smile at the line and keep my feet on the deck of America. If you hear a woman laughing with the captain near the bridge, that is me. I am not the cleaner, though I honor every cleaner on board. I am the owner. I am the woman from the blue house who learned that rivers need banks and love needs rules, and both can hold.